Duke Gilson, Chapter 7, First Part. Although the group hadn't gotten caught up in an avalanche, the snowstorm picked up with the coming of twilight and began to trouble them. They dug a hollow in the snow and planned to use their coats as sleeping bags to keep warm. Vera's medicine would also prevent Dust's wound from getting infected. That left as their only problems the fear of the darkness and the castle. The snow-covered peak of Mount Shilla had suddenly transformed into an enormous castle. The ridge had collapsed, leaving the four of them utterly stranded. They had to wonder if the mountain folk who'd been turned into vampires might not somehow return to life yet again to assail them with fangs bared. Worst of all, they didn't know what had raised them from the dead, where the culprit was, or what they had planned. Even if whoever it was had returned to the castle, they would be watching them even now with the bloodshot eyes of the nobility, and lips crazed by eternal hunger. 2 tents had been erected, and Vera and Dust went into one, while Cray and Louis occupied the other. Initially the plan was to have Vera and Louis in one, and the 2 men in the other. But not knowing what might be prowling around out there, it was decided to have 1 man in each tent. When their meal of crackers and canned goods was finished, Louis, who hadn't said a word up to that point, was looking out the window when he started talking. "Say, you think that lady's okay?" He was referring to Lilia. Rolling over, Cray was incredulous. "You're worried about that sorry-ass woman? She treated you like crap and left us in the cold. Normally, that's the kind of thing you could hold against her to your dying day." Nothing from the boy. Louis was silent, not because he agreed with the outlaw, but because he'd noticed the malice that permeated the man's words. Nevertheless, he ventured, "But what if, somehow, she ended up in the castle and—" He couldn't bring himself to finish. Cray chortled. "Then so much the better. Hell, right about now the master of the castle is draining her blood." And then the boy changed the topic. "I'm worried about the 2 next door." Cray gave the boy a stunned look. "Why's that?" "They're a guard and a doctor." "I'm worried about them. The doctor seems to think she's done something wrong to Mr. Dust, and he's so cold to her. You're gonna grow up to be a nosy old man. I agree with you, though." The boy then turned back to Cray and asked, "Why do you suppose that is?" He was talking about Vera and Dust. "Damned if I know. Something must have happened." Cray looked up at the ceiling. "Frontier or capital, wherever you go, so long as there's people there, you'll find kinds of trouble you'd never imagine. Then throw the nobility into the mix, and you've got a real mess. What really makes things dangerous is the nobles seem to have emotions like hate and sadness and love, too." "They both look so sad." "Really? Don't look that way to me." "I think it's in their hearts. You really are like a nosy old landlord, aren't you? I'm sure that'll serve you really well. Mr. Cray, why are you up on the mountain?" The guileless eyes upon him flustered the outlaw. "Don't go turning your guns on me all of a sudden." "I'm sorry. It's just, I know. I don't exactly look like the mountain-climbing type. You'd expect to see me shaking folks down at knife point at best, eh?" "That's not what I—" Laurie began angrily. He shook his head ferociously in denial. Cray grinned wryly. "Nah, that's okay. Let me take this opportunity to put my cards on the table. You get to be about your age. That makes you an adult out on the frontier. You should make it a point to find out a little about the man sleeping in the next bed. I'm Cray Jansen, just so you know. Knife expert and outlaw. And the first time I killed anyone, I was 7. Larry gazed, dumbfounded, at the willing confessor. It was the landlord of our apartment, who was pawing at my mother. And that was some pretty smooth knife handling, if I do say so myself. Even at that age, I was already a full-blown punk. Please don't bring out your knife. Seeing how the boy's terrified eyes focused on the knife that flew from his sleeve, Cray smiled at the boy and said, "No need to be scared is all that. Hell, a knife is just a tool, the same as a hoe or a plow." "I don't think so. A knife like that can't be used for anything but stabbing people. And the person who carries it—" Here the boy hastily clamped a hand over his mouth. "Come on, can't you come right out and say it? Say what?" "You're a crafty little squirt, ain't you?" Giving another one of his countless bitter grins, Cray twirled the knife intently. "Sure, the kind of fellow who carries a couple of these around ain't gonna amount to much." By the time I realized that, it was already too late. Yeah, I'd killed 15, maybe 16 by then. I was, what, maybe 18 years old? Are you sure you don't think of those as the good old days? Shut your yap. So why go up Mount Shilla? The boy then buttoned his lip. He'd noticed a shadow skim across Cray's profile. Though Lurie wasn't yet fully grown, even he could understand it was a wound that would never heal. It was enough to give him the impression the outlaw had a very good reason for climbing the mountain. And that's enough about little old me. Getting back to you, you were up here searching for your dad, weren't you? That's right. Even now my father lives somewhere on the mountain. I'm sure it was my father who took care of those mountain folk. Well, that's just great. But if your dad's still alive, wouldn't he be better off coming down the mountain instead of wiping out mountain folk? I mean, that's only human. Or is there some special reason why he wouldn't want to come back? Your mom wasn't some kind of mad nymphomaniac or something, was she? Please stop. Cray shrugged his shoulders and laughed sheepishly. Sorry for saying that. Forgive me? Seeing the tears filling the boy's eyes and the way his body quivered, the outlaw pointed the knife in his hand in Lurie's direction. To show you how bad I feel, I'll save you just once if you get into trouble, even if it kills me. And then that'll put us square, okay? Wiping the corners of his eyes, Lurie replied, "That's all right. Don't worry yourself about it. I'm used to people saying all sorts of things to me." In saying that, he got into a sleeping bag. "I'm going to bed now. Good night." The sound of the wind howled fiercely in Cray's ears. Page break. When they found Cray at their tent a few minutes later, Vera and Dust were startled. "What is it?" "Well, I just wanted to hear a female voice. Say, Gramps, go keep an eye on the squirt." Gramps glowered at the outlaw. For a moment his look was savage enough to drain the color from the hired killer, but the guard quickly turned to face Vera. "It's okay. Go on." And once Dust had left, Cray asked right away, "About the squirt. You happen to know anything about his family?" And Vera was stunned. "What are you trying to hide? It's hard to picture you being concerned about that child." "I ain't really concerned about him. The squirt's got nothing to do with me. It's just that, in my experience, when a kid like that pulls a stunt you'd never imagine, there's usually a heap of money involved. And the way in hell would a kid that age be climbing a mountain in winter? And I don't care how much he loves his dad. What I want to know ties into that. And I figured it was something like that. No, I wish I could say I did. And the doctor's gaze seemed to see right into his soul, and Cray averted his eyes. So you really want to know about the child's family situation because of money? Why else? I pretended not to know around the boy, but his father went up to check out the noble's castle. What, he was a scholar or something? Vera shook her head warily. Paintings and jewels, weapons and machines, the likes of which the nobility alone could produce but humans could use. Haven't you ever heard how nobles are able to make gold from seawater? So that's what he was there for, to loot the joint. Knitting her brow, Vera shushed him. Drawing a crumpled pack of cigarettes from the chest pocket of her thermal coat, she took one for herself, then offered the pack to Cray. I feel like I'm in one of those classy liquor saloons in the capital. Do they have hostesses my age there? Sparking the Strike Anywhere match on the sleeve of her coat, she lit her own cigarette, and Cray's. Blowing out a lungful of smoke, the outlaw said, "That tastes foul. Roll up dried mildew or something. Live with it. Out on the frontier, this is what you get." That life on the frontier was no easy thing, had surpassed fact and become the stuff of legends. To wit, with their shipments from the capital, they would starve in 3 days. In this constant state of starvation, parents would kill and eat their children. When there was nothing left to eat, they would drink their own blood. In doing so, they would become half vampire themselves, despite never having been bitten by a noble. And so on and so forth. The truth was, most areas were capable of self-sufficiency, and items that supposedly could be acquired only in the capital were frequently brought out by black marketers and moved at exorbitant prices. Depending on the territory, there were places that had entered contracts with mail-order firms in the capital and squeezed out the black marketers. Still, luxury goods remained in short supply. Well, I complained about it too for the first 6 months I was on the frontier. There, with a bunch of bumpkins like that, you weren't likely to find someone looking to hire a killer. Hardly a surprise someone would turn sneak thief and go after a noble's treasure. There were rumors for a long time that the child's father was collecting items that belonged to the nobility and selling them to black marketers. I think the boy knows it too. When I served as the school's doctor, it was the cause of a big fight that ended up with students carried into my office. Ah, the poor little fella. Blowing out smoke, Vera replied, "Wrong. It was the children he fought you should feel sorry for." Really? 3 upperclassmen, all boys who stood a head taller than him and were used to getting in scrapes. "Just a minute," Cray said, pointing in the direction of the other tent. "You mean to tell me he's some kind of wolf in sheep's clothing? He is when he fights. The rest of the time he's just like you see. If he's a wolf in sheep's clothing, sometimes he's just a sheep. But what? The child didn't remember anything about the fight, you see. He knew they were teasing him about his father, but after that his memory was a complete blank. The other 3 weren't hurt too badly, so he didn't ask too many questions." "You sure he wasn't so excited his mind just went blank? I've seen a fair bit of that myself." "No, but that's just my intuition." "In that case, what is he? Some kind of genius brawler who loses his memory?" "I don't get it," Cray said, exhaling smoke flamboyantly. "Well, whatever he is, and I didn't come right out and ask him about this, but he might have come looking for his father to clear him of the accusation of looting ruins. I don't know how he'd do that, frankly. I think it'd be impossible." "Amen to that. Thanks." Cray got up. Perhaps due to the wind, he had to struggle to get the door open, shoving his way through the snow as he stepped outside. About 5 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. After the ceiling tape had been removed, the person who stepped in accompanied by the wind and snow wasn't dust. "What is it, Cray?" the doctor asked in a suspicious tone. With a rather odd expression on his face, the outlaw replied, "They're gone." "What?" "The tent's there. Inside. It's like they just stepped out. They left cups of cocoa and coffee, both still warm. Both of them were there until a second ago. It's just..." Though Cray's features stiffened, no terror surfaced in them. Even if he was holding it back, that in itself was laudable. Leave it to the professional killer. Were they taken? Most likely. I don't know about the kid, but I hardly think your bodyguard would have gone without a fight. Think maybe a roaming dimensional vortex got him. Or did some foe come along who was so tough they couldn't do a thing? From the castle. Vera didn't conceal the fright in her voice. In that case, it's Duke Gilson. It's a little late to be getting scared. When the mountain changed into that castle, we decided not to take off, right? I know. Putting her hand on her chest, Vera let out a deep breath. I'm okay, but what do we do about those two? At any rate, I'll search our immediate surroundings, and if I don't find them, I'll give up. You are staying right here. You've got a weapon, don't you? Vera touched her hand to her right coat pocket, where she tucked a rapid-fire rivet gun. She had a rifle, too. Neither calmed her in the least. See you, then. Cray disappeared into the darkness. After redoing the tape on the door, Vera went to the center of the tent and sat down. Anxiety gnawed at her heart. As she was rubbing her right hand over her face, there was a knock at the door. It's me. She recognized the voice as Cray's. Open up. If you've got a flashlight, I need to borrow it. Just a minute. Running over, Vera peeled off the tape. In that instant, a horrifying thought sparked in her brain. The voice was Cray's. But was the person using it really him or not? A snow-covered man stepped inside. Brushing the flakes off his hood, Cray looked up. Doc. His breath caught in his throat. There was no one there. The lady who'd just undone the tape was nowhere to be seen. Not the doc, too. She was just here. Rooted in place, the lust admired in a bottomless solitude, but it was immediately extinguished. Someone had tapped him on the shoulder. First part, end.